In 1994, families on Connecticut's Gold Coast were paying thousands of dollars for security. Cameras, motion detectors, access codes. They didn't know that the man who installed these systems had already picked the date of their death. His name was Arthur Lee Groves, lead technician for Guardian Shield. He came to homes by invitation, wearing his company uniform, a toolkit, and a polite smile. The homeowners would thank him for his work. They'd offer him coffee, showed him where the sockets were, and he'd memorize where the bedroom was, where the children's room was, where they had dinner at night. 5 years, 4 families, 15 people who will never celebrate Christmas again. This is the story of a man who turned someone else's security into his own personal theater, about a system that was supposed to protect, but let a killer in through the front door, and the small mistake that ruined his perfect scenario. On the 23rd of December, 1996, Catherine Miller woke up earlier than usual. At 6:15 in the morning, she was already standing in the kitchen of their home in Darien, one of Connecticut's most expensive suburbs, making a to-do list for the next 2 days. She was 43 years old. She worked as an interior design consultant, ran her own small business, and was raising 2 children, 14-year-old Emily and 11-year-old Jacob. Her husband, Richard, was a financial analyst for a company in Stamford and had been working late the last few weeks end of the year. Reports, bonuses. But on the 24th of December, things were supposed to be different. Christmas Eve, family tradition. Catherine was proud of the way they celebrated Christmas. No restaurants, no guests, just the 4 of them. Richard lit the fireplace. The children were decorating the tree. She cooked a turkey from her mother's recipe. And then they would sit in the living room, exchanging gifts and watching old Christmas films until midnight. This year, Catherine especially wanted everything to be perfect. Emily was getting older, withdrawn, and spending more time in her room. Jacob was addicted to computer games and hardly ever left his computer screen. Richard worked 60 hours a week. The family was sprawled out, and Christmas was the only day they were whole again. 3 weeks ago, Richard had insisted on installing a new security system. Burglaries were on the rise in their neighborhood. At least, that's what the local paper said. Guardian Shield was considered the best in the area. Their technician arrived on the 9th of December, spent almost 4 hours in the house, installed sensors on all the windows, a camera at the entrance, and a control panel in the hallway. Catherine remembered him, a quiet, soft-spoken man in his early 30s. He worked carefully, made little noise, and politely declined the offered coffee. When she asked him if the system was reliable, he answered briefly, "You're safe now." She believed it. On the 23rd of December, Catherine spent the whole day in preparation. In the morning, shopping. In the afternoon, cleaning. In the evening, she wrapped presents in the bedroom while Richard watched football downstairs and the children sat in their rooms. At 22:30, she checked that the front door was locked. She put the house on the alarm system, a 4-digit code that only family members knew. She went upstairs and went to bed next to her husband. She didn't know that at that moment, in a dark van parked 2 blocks from their house, someone was looking at a screen. It showed their bedroom, their living room, their kitchen. He'd been watching them for 3 weeks now. On the 24th of December, 1996, the Miller family gathered in the living room around 7 o'clock in the evening. Richard lit the fireplace. Emily reluctantly helped set the table. Jacob was fiddling with the garland, which didn't want to blink evenly. Catherine took the turkey out of the oven and called everyone to the table. They sat down to dinner at 1945. At 23 hours and 15 minutes, the alarm system in the Miller house was deactivated. The code was entered correctly on the first try. The front door opened and closed without a sound. The security system didn't detect the intrusion, because to her, it wasn't an intrusion. It was a technician's code. a master code that Arthur Groves had kept for himself since the 9th of December, when a grateful hostess had offered him coffee and he had memorized the layout of the rooms. On the 26th of December, neighbors called the police. The Millers' car had been parked in the driveway for 2 days, but no one had left the house, answered the phone, or picked up the mail. When officers went inside, they found 4 bodies in the living room. The family was sitting on the couch, in the same position in which they usually watched Christmas films. In front of them on the coffee table was a videotape in a festive wrapping with a red bow. There was no writing on it, only the date, the 24th of December. And this was only the 4th family. Arthur Lee Groves was born on the 14th of October in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The city was on the border of 2 worlds, industrial neighborhoods with shabby apartment buildings to the north, and the shining Gold Coast to the south. Darien, Greenwich, Westport, names that sounded like a pass to another life. They were less than 20 minutes away by car, but for the Groves family, those 20 minutes equaled an abyss. His mother, Doris Groves, worked as a cleaner in the homes of wealthy Fairfield County families. She would leave early in the morning and return late at night, smelling of other people's carpets and detergents. Sometimes she took little Arthur with her, when there was no one to leave him with, when a neighbor refused to look after him, when there were no other options. He sat in the kitchens of other people's houses and waited for his mother to finish. He looked at the high ceilings, the white tablecloths, the fridges full of food that no one ate, looked at the silver-framed family photos, smiling faces, dogs, boats, Christmas trees. He didn't touch anything, just stared. Later, when criminal psychologists would analyze his childhood, they would note a pattern was already forming. Observation, distance, feeling invisible in someone else's world. His father, Raymond Groves, worked as a car mechanic and drank. Those were the 2 constants of his existence. He didn't beat his wife and son. He was just absent. He sat in front of the television with a bottle of beer, went to the garage, came back smelling of whiskey. Arthur couldn't remember a single conversation with him longer than 3 sentences. At school, Arthur was the kid nobody noticed. Not a bully, not an excellent student, not an athlete, just a boy in the 3rd row who always handed in his work on time and never raised his hand. Teachers couldn't remember his face a year after graduation. His classmates couldn't remember his name. He preferred it. Invisibility gave him something important, the ability to watch. At the age of 12, Arthur started going to rich neighborhoods in the evenings. Not stealing, not hooliganism, just watching. He chose houses with big windows where the curtains weren't drawn and watched the families inside. How they eat dinner, how they watch television, how they laugh at something he can't hear. He especially liked Christmas. In December, the houses were lit up with garlands and the windows were turned into screens on which perfect scenes were played out. Father by the fireplace, mother with a tray of biscuits, children by the Christmas tree, everything he didn't have and would never have. He didn't feel angry, at least not then, only a cold, steady desire to stare. One day, it was December 1974, and he was 12, he was noticed. A man from the house in Darien went out on the porch and saw the boy standing by the hedge. He didn't bother to look into it. He called the police. A patrol officer brought Arthur home by his ear. The father was too drunk to react. The mother cried and apologized, not to her son, but to the officer. Neighbors saw the boy being led out of the police car. By morning, the whole neighborhood knew that Doris Groves' son was a little pervert who peeped in rich people's windows. Arthur didn't cry. He didn't make excuses. He just realized one thing. If you want to look, you have to be invisible. Really invisible. He spent the next 2 years learning how to do it. Finding blind spots, memorizing patrol schedules, learning how to move so as not to attract attention. He never got caught again. But something else broke for good. On the 24th of December in the year 1975, Arthur was 13 years old. That evening, everything started as usual. Mother came home late from work, tired and silent. Father sat by the television with a bottle. There were tinned beans and bread for dinner. There was no Christmas tree. My mother said that this year there were no holidays. Around 8 p.m., the doorbell rang. A woman of about 35 stood on the doorstep, well-groomed in an expensive coat, wearing a perfume Arthur recognized. It was the smell of the houses his mother cleaned. Behind the woman was a large black car with its engine running. Dad got up from the couch for the first time all evening. Arthur could not hear the whole conversation. Only fragments, his mother shouting, his father muttering something, the woman standing silent and waiting. 15 minutes later, Raymond Groves came out of the house carrying a small bag. He didn't look at his son, didn't say a word, just got into a black car and drove away. Arthur later learnt the details. The woman's name was Margaret Hollis. Her family owned a chain of car dealerships in Fairfield County. Raymond had fixed her car 8 months ago, and they'd been dating ever since. Now he was moving in with her. To the big house with the white columns, into the very world his son could only peer into through the windows. Doris Groves didn't survive it. Not physically. She was breathing, eating, going to work. But something inside her broke. She started drinking, first in the evenings, then in the mornings. Lost one job, then another. Stopped cleaning the house, stopped cooking. She stopped looking at her son, as if his very presence reminded her of her betrayal. In March of 1977, when Arthur was 14, she woke him up in the middle of the night, told him to get dressed, put him on a bus to Hartford, and gave him a note with the address of a juvenile shelter. Said she'd pick him up when he got back on his feet, that it wouldn't take long, that he'd be better off there. She didn't come a month later, or a year later, or 5 years later. Arthur Groves spent 4 years in the state care system before he came of age. He didn't make a scene, didn't try to run away, didn't look for his mother. He just waited, studied, watching. Later, when criminal psychologists would profile him, they would define that night, the 24th of December in 1975, as the point of no return. The moment when his inner constraints began to crumble. The father chose the rich family over him. His mother chose the bottle instead of him. Both losses were because of that world outside the windows. A world of big houses, perfect holidays, and families that existed just for him to look at. That night, the 13-year-old boy realized several things that shaped the rest of his life. Number 1, family is a picture. A pretty wrapper with nothing real behind it. His father proved it by leaving him for another man's woman on Christmas Eve. His mother proved it by abandoning her own son. 2, those people behind the lit windows are no better than he is. They're just better at pretending. Their happiness is as fake as Christmas cards. And someday he'll prove it. 3rd, if he wants to control his own life, he's going to have to control other people's lives. Arthur Groves left the orphanage in 1981 with a high school diploma and a clear plan. He enrolled in an electrical engineering course and specialized in security systems. The choice was no accident. Now he'll have a legal way to enter other people's homes. Watch, memorize, observe, and no one will ever know he was there. In 1983, Arthur Groves took a job as a technician for a small alarm company in Stamford. The job was simple. Go to the address, install sensors, connect the control panel, explain to the owners how to use the system. He did it well, quiet, tidy, professional. In 8 years, he changed 3 companies, each time moving up to a higher position. By 1991, he was the lead technician for Guardian Shield, one of the most prestigious security firms on Connecticut's Gold Coast. Their clients were bankers, lawyers, hedge fund managers, people who could afford the best protection, People who lived in the very houses Arthur had looked into as a child. Now they were inviting him inside, opening doors, showed him every room, thanked him for his work. For the first 3 years, he just watched, installed systems, went back to his flat in Bridgeport and thought about what he saw, the families, their habits, about how easy it would be to go back. But something changed in the year 1991. In the early 90s, miniature cameras appeared on the market, a technological innovation that was originally designed for covert surveillance of nannies and housekeepers. They were the size of a button and could transmit a signal up to 100 meters away. Arthur saw them at an industry trade show in New York and immediately realized that this was exactly what he had been missing. He started buying micro cameras in small batches, through different suppliers for cash, without documentation. He modified them in his garage, improving signal quality and transmission range. He equipped a van, the same one he used to carry his tools in, with receivers and monitors. Everything was ready by December 1991. His first victim was the Jennings family of Westport. Patrick and Susan Jennings ordered the installation of a security system in early November. The standard kit: sensors on the windows, a camera at the entrance, a control panel with a 4-digit code. Arthur arrived on the 5th of November and spent 3.5 hours in the house. Officially, he installed 12 sensors and 1 camera. Unofficially, 4 more micro cameras in the living room, bedroom, kitchen, and nursery. Each was hidden so that it would be undetectable by normal inspection. Inside a ventilation grill, behind a picture frame, in the base of a floor lamp, in the casing of a smoke detector. He also kept for himself the system's master code, a combination that allowed the alarm system to be deactivated without the owner's knowledge. For the next 7 weeks, Arthur spent every night in his van, parked at various points within a 200-meter radius of the Jennings house. He watched the screens and studied the family. Patrick came home from work around 7 in the evening and went straight into the shower. Susan was cooking dinner and talking to her sister on the phone at the same time. Their daughter, 9-year-old Chloe, did her homework at the kitchen table and then watched cartoons until 9. They went to bed at different times. First their daughter, then Susan, last Patrick, who stayed up late in front of the TV. Arthur knew when they fought and what they fought about. He knew that Susan suspected her husband of having an affair with a colleague. He knew that Patrick was unhappy with how much money his wife spent on clothes. Knew that Chloe cries at night because her parents shout at each other behind the wall. The perfect family. Picture perfect. The perfect lie. The week before Christmas, Arthur began the first phase of what he would later call canvas preparation. He called the Jenningses' home phone in the middle of the night. When someone picked up, there was silence on the other end. Or, more frighteningly, their own voices. Recordings of conversations Arthur had made through his cameras, snippets of phrases, Chloe's laughter, Susan's whispers. He'd remotely switch on the lights in the rooms when the family was asleep. He would activate the alarm system for no reason, and the Jennings would check the house and find everything was fine. They'd call Guardian Shield to complain about system malfunctions, and the company would send a technician to check it out. Guess who? Arthur came with professional sympathy, checked the equipment, spread his hands and said that everything was working properly. Probably power surges, or interference from the neighbor's equipment. Nothing serious. He looked at the Jennings' exhausted faces, sleep-deprived, anxious, paranoid, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Control. On the 24th of December, 1991, Arthur Groves entered the Jennings house at 23 hours and 40 minutes. He used the master code he'd set himself 7 weeks earlier. The alarm system didn't go off. The camera at the entrance had been switched off, by him too. The details of what happened inside are recorded in the case file. We will not recount them. The important thing is this. Arthur didn't just kill the Jennings family. He spent more than 2 hours in the house after it was all over. He arranged the bodies in the living room, on the couch, in front of the fireplace, in poses mimicking a family evening. He switched on the Christmas lights and placed 4 cups of chilled cocoa on the coffee table. Then he left a present under the tree, a video cassette in a festive wrapper. The tape contained footage from his hidden cameras. 7 weeks of the Jennings family's life compressed into 45 minutes. Their fights, their tears, their attempts to feign happiness in front of friends and family. At the end is a short inscription in white text on a black background. "Now you're together forever." The police found the bodies on the 26th of December. The investigation lasted 8 months and was inconclusive. There was no forced entry, no sign of a struggle, no obvious motive. The videotape was examined, but in the year 1992, technology did not allow tracing the source of the tape. The case was classed as an unsolved murder. Arthur Groves continued to work at Guardian Shield, received praise from management for his professionalism, installed 114 more security systems the following year, and he chose a second family. The pattern he created with Jennings repeated itself 3 times over the next 5 years. 1992nd year, the Carter family of New Canaan, a married couple and 2 teenage sons. Installation of system in October. Surveillance for 2 months. Psychological terror in the last fortnight before Christmas. Bodies found on the 27th of December. 1994. The Campbell family of Greenwich. It was a case that would later become central to the prosecution's case. Arthur didn't just watch. He replaced the lens in their home video camera with his transmitter. The family recorded the holiday dinner on camera, unaware that Arthur was receiving the same signal in real time. He sat in a van 2 blocks from the house and watched their Christmas, their real, unproduced Christmas, hours before he went inside. On a tape seized later, he can be heard whispering comments over their laughter. 1996. The Miller family of Darien. 4th and final. Each time, the pattern became more complex. The surveillance period became longer, from 7 weeks for the Jennings to 3 months for the Campbells. The number of hidden cameras increased, from 4 to 8. The psychological terror phase became more sophisticated. Telephone calls were joined by letters, postcards without return addresses. Small objects moved from place to place. But some things remained the same. Always the affluent suburbs of the Gold Coast. Always full families with children. Always Guardian Shield customers who wanted to feel safe before the holidays. Always Christmas Eve. Always a videotape under the Christmas tree. Police from 4 different jurisdictions investigated the murders independently of each other. Connecticut is a small state, but the wealthy suburbs jealously guarded their autonomy. Darien didn't share information with Greenwich. Westport didn't coordinate with New Canaan. Each department was working on its own unsolved case, unaware that it was working on the same case. The FBI only got involved in 1995 after a reporter from the Hartford Courant published an article about a strange coincidence. 3 families in wealthy Connecticut suburbs murdered on Christmas Eve in 4 years. All clients of security companies, all with no sign of forced entry. Feds set up a task force, started building a profile of the perp. White male, 30 to 40 years old, technical skills, probably works in security, knows the victims or has access to their homes. The profile was accurate, but by the time it was compiled, Arthur Groves was already watching the Miller family. Arthur Groves made one mistake in 5 years. One, and that was enough. On the 24th of December, 1996, he left the videotape under the tree at the Miller house as usual. The tape was edited to his standard template. 3 months of watching the family, condensed into 50 minutes. Quarrels, dinners, bedtime conversations, moments they considered private. But this time, he was in a hurry. Something had gone wrong. Perhaps a neighbor's dog, perhaps the headlights in the street. He was nervous for the first time in 5 years. and I got the wrong tape. The film he used for editing was not clean. It had previously contained a TV program, a local news program that Arthur had recorded at home on his VCR. The montage took up almost the entire length of the cassette, but not all of it. At the very end, after the end credits, there are a few seconds of the old tape. The WTNH evening news splash screen, the date in the corner of the screen, the announcer's face. FBI investigators noticed it on the third viewing. The experts of the Bureau of Audiovisual Examination examined these few seconds, frame by frame. The signal quality indicated a specific type of tuner. But most importantly, there was a thin white stripe in the upper right corner of the image, a defect characteristic of a certain batch of Panasonic VCRs, manufactured in the year 1989. About 12,000 of these machines were sold all over the East Coast. But the investigation narrowed it down. Male, 30 to 40 years old, works in security, has access to the victims' homes. The list went down to 73 people, then down to 19, then down to 4. Arthur Groves was the third person to be visited with a search warrant. On the 26th of December, 1996, at 10 o'clock in the morning, FBI agents entered his home in Bridgeport. Arthur himself was at work. Guardian Shield had called him in for an emergency repair at a customer's place. He found out about the search when it was too late. In a garage behind the house, investigators found what would later be called the director's studio, a wall of 20 monitors, a professional editing table, an archive of over 500 videotapes, each signed with date and address, hundreds of hours of footage, bedrooms, living rooms, children's rooms, bathrooms, people who will never know they were being watched, and 14 cassettes from a separate shelf, marked with a red marker. 4 families, 15 people, 5 years. Arthur Groves was arrested the same day in the car park of a shopping center in Stamford. He didn't resist. He didn't try to run. He just stood outside his van, the same van in which he'd spent hundreds of nights watching other people's lives, and waited to be handcuffed. When detained, he uttered only one phrase. The investigator asked if he understood his rights. Arthur nodded and replied, "They let me in themselves." The trial of Arthur Lee Groves began in September 1997 and lasted 14 weeks. The prosecution presented more than 800 items of physical evidence, video recordings, surveillance logs, which Arthur kept with meticulous precision, diagrams of houses with camera locations marked, receipts for equipment purchases. The defense tried to insist on insanity. Invited psychiatrists diagnosed the defendant with a pronounced voyeuristic disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. But the jury did not accept this argument. On the 5th of December, 1997, Arthur Groves was found guilty of 15 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. After the verdict was announced, he didn't say a word. He just stared at the audience, the way he stared at the screens in his van. The Groves case changed the security industry in the United States. In 1998, the state of Connecticut passed a law requiring security companies to conduct background checks on all technicians. Federal standards tightened the requirements for master code storage. Guardian Shield went bankrupt within a year of the process, but for 15 men and their families, it was all too late. Arthur Groves is incarcerated at the Northern Maximum Security Correctional Institution in Somers, Connecticut. He has never filed an appeal. He's never given an interview. He has expressed no remorse. According to the prison psychologist, he spends most of his time at the window of his cell, just looking out. Gold Coast families are still ordering security systems before Christmas. Cameras, sensors, access codes. They believe it makes their homes safer. That's probably true. But Arthur Groves' story reminds us of a simple thing. Sometimes the biggest threat is the person you yourself let in. Someone you trusted to protect your family. Someone who knows your code, your routines, the layout of your rooms. The one who's watching.